What was your exact focus when you worked with him? Was it like the broader overall view of what you just mentioned, or was there something specific that brought on that larger viewpoint?
Yeah, he, again, as the founder of Earth Day, he was concerned in the broadest sense possible with what we now call environmental sustainability. Could human beings habit this planet prosperously and yet have a sustainable future without either undermining our own civilization and the biosphere that sustains us, the only known biosphere in the universe at this point? So he definitely had that sort of big picture, or being able to see the forest for the trees. One of the concerns he had in particular, and one that I shared even way back when, and more so later, was with human overpopulation. That is, how many human beings are capable of being supported by our nation, by the ecosystems of our country, as well as by the planet as a whole, and not to overshoot the ability of the earth to provide for us. In other words, both he and I would say that the important question is not how many people a given area of land or habitat or the entire biosphere can contain, but how many it can sustain at an acceptable standard of living and quality of life. And it's not an unlimited number. I mean, I hope it's not a newsflash to anyone that we live on a finite, non-growing planet that, if anything, and the biosphere that is part of that planet, that if anything is being degraded as a result of the many, many human demands, anthropogenic or anthropocentric demands that are being placed on that planet's resources that supply us with, everything from drinking water to electricity to food, and the ability of the environment to deal with or assimilate the waste that we generate or push into that environment, including one of the most infamous ones nowadays, carbon dioxide. So he had both. He had a particular interest in population because at the time of the first Earth Day in 1970, the U.S. population was growing very, very rapidly, primarily as a result of what we call natural increase, or births minus deaths. Later on, as the birth rate in this country and all countries in the world pretty much began to decline, in the United States in particular, immigration became the larger factor driving U.S. population growth with no end in sight. So he, became concerned about that as well.
So is immigration a target when you're looking at a solution to this? Because if you're talking about a growing population, if you say that's one of the areas that increased our population, I can understand that being a focal point. But when you're talking about us living longer, I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that. So what's the big solution?
Yeah, well, everybody wants to live longer. And so that's one of the other factors related to population growth, of course, is, the mortality rate versus the birth rate, or actually, the birth rate versus the death rate. As long as the birth rate, that is the number of births in any given year, is higher than the death rate, the population will be growing. If the death rate ever gets higher, then the population starts to decline. And then the other factor, of course, is net migration, the immigration into a place minus the emigration out of it. The U.S., United States, of course, has long been one of the most popular destinations for immigrants and refugees around the world, and for the past century and more. And we have a proud history of that. But our particular group, Numbers USA, would argue that there are limits to that, right? You can't, and no country in the world would accept unlimited immigration. And if you're concerned about, population as a factor in environmental quality and environmental degradation in these United States, in that our fertility rate, which is related to the birth rate, that's the number of children the average American woman, or woman in any country, or women on Earth would have during their reproductive years, right? There's the famous number of 2.1, which is so-called replacement level fertility. If women on average have a fertility rate of 2.1, then you will have over time a stable population, neither shrinking nor growing. In the United States, for the last 50 years, American women have averaged a TFR, total fertility rate, of about 2.1, or even below that. I think it's 1.6 or 1.7 right now. So fertility or the birth rate long ago ceased being the main driver of unsustainable U.S. population growth. And by the 1980s, immigration began to supplant it. And now, if you look at projected growth, say to the year 2060, when we're supposed to, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, grow from about 330 plus million Americans right now to over 400 million, that is an addition of some 70 million or so in a country that many of us would argue is already overpopulated, virtually almost 100% of that growth will be related to future immigration.